Hello, everyone. Sufit here. I'm here today with Chuck Ticker, mediator of sibling estate disputes and the author of the popular book, Bobby Gets Bubkiss, Navigating the Sibling Estate Fight. Chuck joins us today from the siblingguy.com. Welcome, Chuck.
Hi, Sophie. Good to be back.
So you're a mediator, a former estate litigator, and so you've seen mediation from every perspective, both as counsel for the participants and as a mediator yourself. And mediation has undergone a lot of changes, especially in the last few years. So I have a question for you today about the form of mediation. So we've seen in-person mediation all in one room. We've seen in person in separate rooms. We've seen Zoom in one room. We've seen Zoom in separate rooms. What works best? A joint session with all the parties in one room, face to face, out in the open, the way you would have it in court, or this thing where people are in separate rooms and the mediator goes shuffling between rooms? What do you think works best?
Very good questions, and I don't know if I have the answers. I can just tell you what's happening in my practice, where I, of course, am focusing on sibling estate fights, which are highly charged emotionally, a lot of baggage, a lot of mistrust, and I can tell you that uh, it's very difficult for me sometimes to get the parties to agree to an opening joint session where they don't have to say anything, but basically just sit in the same room or be in the same room virtually on Zoom, with me giving my spiel about mediation and the advantages and why I think it's the way to go, and what we're going to try to accomplish during the day, and some logistics. Sometimes I have difficulty even with that. And if it's on Zoom, sometimes the parties turn their cameras off. They don't even want to see one another. So, and then the rest of the day, I'm shuffling, like you said, back between their respective caucus rooms, meeting with them and their lawyers. Now, there are some mediators that are very strong advocates of the joint session. Uh, One of them is a mediator that I've been following his blogs, Jeff Kitchaven, a very well-known uh, mediator out of California, and he's a big fan of joint sessions. And he says, we're not using them enough. They're highly effective because you really have that personal interaction. I think it's a great idea. I still think in the context of what I do, um, when they don't even want to look at one another on camera, it may be a little difficult, a little bit of wishful thinking. But I think ultimately that would be a good idea, because the best thing to do is to have that conversation. So hopefully, in some cases, I had one where that we did a joint session because they were arguing about which charity should get the money. So it wasn't that emotional. So we could have like a round the table discussion. Um, so what's better? I think having a joint session would be great. What's practical or doable in the estate dispute context? I don't think it's a joint session all day. Um, and virtual versus in person, that's another day, another video maybe. Um, I think we're
Yeah.
starting to see a little more requests now for in person, but still the majority of my requests are for virtual, because I think people find them more convenient. Whether they're more successful to do them in person, um, I don't know. I haven't seen the stats on that.
Let's go back to the let's assume we're talking about in person here. Um, if you have now you have specialty that's different than most mediators specialty, right? You specialize in the sibling estate fight. Do you think that the fact that there are siblings involved makes it harder um to have them in one room? Is there a possibility maybe of intimidation if they're all in one room?
Well, yes, and that's another thing that for some parties, sometimes coming to the mediation, um, they're very uncomfortable even seeing their sibling. This may go back to something that happened when they were kids, and sometimes there's some very bad experience that they've had with their sibling, and they just don't want anything to do with them. They don't want to look at them. They don't want to be in the same room. And sometimes it's because they're just angry or they don't like the person, but sometimes it's because it brings up these old fears and sometimes trauma. So you have to be very sensitive um, when you're talking to them. Is there anything that's going to make them really uncomfortable? Because that's the last thing you want to do as a mediator, is make the parties uncomfortable.
Is there any possibility, Chuck, that if you did have the joint in-person session, that all of a sudden these siblings who've been, squabbling through lawyers for months or even years would look each other in the eye and say, "What the heck are we fighting about? Let's just, you know, hug and divide this so that we still have a family and you can come over for the holidays." Does that ever happen? Could it happen? Is that an advantage maybe of the joint session or potential?
Yeah, it is potential. I have seen it happen. Some families where they're able to settle the dispute and move forward and uh, try to rebuild the relationship because they had a good relationship at one point, and unfortunately, the relationship is deteriorated as a result of an estate fight. Um, so it would be great to have that joint session. It's just been my experience, and I'd love to hear from uh, other people who've gone through these mediations, see what they think. It's just been my experience that the, for the most part, the emotions are just running too high, that it's just not feasible to do that joint session. And maybe that means I can improve my skills as a mediator. And I learn something at every mediation that I do. I learn something new. But right now, from where I'm sitting, I think it would be difficult.
Do parties ask you typically to recommend one or the other, to recommend whether it should be joint or separate rooms, or do they come to you kind of dictating from the get-go, either their lawyers or the parties, yeah, we don't want to be in the same room, we do want to be in the same room? And what if the parties don't agree? What if one sibling wants us all together in a joint session, and the other says, "No way, I'm not getting in a room with him"? Does that ever happen?
Yes, that does happen. So I've never had, to answer your first
Like, I
question,
want to look the guy in the eye when he.
right. To answer your first question, I've never had anyone request a joint session. I've only
Really?
had, I've, no, I've only had them say whether or not they object to a joint session. And sometimes
Ah.
I can only remember a couple of times where they literally, some of them, they just refused to have a joint session. So I had to do my opening spiel separately in each room. And what I always tell the parties and their counsel, I said, look, I'm not going to push you. I don't want you to be uncomfortable, but I can tell you based on my experience that it sets the wrong tone for the day. If you start off on that foot, it's just the wrong foot to start off. Let's at least come together at the beginning, and maybe we'll come together later on in the day. Uh, but not having that opening session, I think, reduces the chances of having a settlement reached.
All right. Well, you heard it here first, folks. Our guest today has been Chuck Ticker, mediator of sibling estate disputes. He's the author of the popular book Bobby Gets Bupkis, Navigating the Sibling Estate Fight. You can find him at thesiblingguy.com. If you haven't already subscribed to this channel, make sure you hit subscribe, give this video a like and comment. Tell us if you're a mediator. Tell us, do you prefer the joint session or the separated sessions? If you're a party, if you've been through this, comment. Tell us what your experience was like. Chuck, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks.